Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get into assignment 2. I've gone ahead and I'm going to start downloading the images. So if I click on an image, once I get there and it opens, all I need to do is go ahead and download that image straight into my downloads folder. You'll see that when you're getting ready to download, once this chooses to cooperate, if I click on the little arrow up here where it says download, click on that, it's going to download down to my downloads bar and I'm good to go. So then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go into Adobe Photoshop. And I don't need to open anything new. Actually, if I go back into my downloads, which I've got down here at my taskbar, if this ever wants to cooperate, once it opens up, I've got all the lessons I've downloaded. I only want you to open 2 of the files. So if you click on Layer Start Image, that's the PSD, so I can click on that, and that should automatically open in Adobe Photoshop because it's already a PSD file. While that's opening, I'm going to click back on my downloads, and I'm also going to open the beach PSD file. Those are the only 2 I want you to open right now. But what you'll notice is when they're both open, I've got these 2 tabs. So I can go between either tab either way. So the beach is on one file, and on a different tab, I've got my layers start file. Just like when I was in Adobe Illustrator, except it's somewhere now in Photoshop. I'm going to stay in my layers start image, and I'm going to start doing some things. Now over here, I've got my layers panel. If I click on it, I can open it. I can even, if I want, I can click and I can pull it out, collapse that back, and I can make it bigger if I ever want to. The thing I have to be careful is that if I exit out, then it thinks I don't want it anymore. So if I exit out, now it's not there for me to open again later. Now don't panic. I can either go to my display and I can reset essentials. Once I do that, my layers come back and I can see all of my work. Or I can always go to Window and I can go to Layers and if I click on that, that'll come back. Okay, so I've got multiple layers on. You can see I've got a background layer, a pineapple layer, and then I've got this little eyeball next to them. I can click on this empty space to get an eyeball back on to turn on my postage, my Hawaii, and my flower layer. So I can always turn a layer off or on. And that's what's nice about Photoshop. I don't have to delete things. I can just turn things off and then they won't be visible. But then later, if I decide, ooh, actually I need that, it's not gone, it's just hidden. So I can turn my visibility on or off as needed using my layers panel. That also lets me select a specific object. So if I select my layer where it says flower and the visibility is on, and I grab my move tool, I don't have to select it the way I used to on our previous lesson because it's by itself on its own layer. Now, if there were other things on this layer, or if I wanted to select just part of the flower, I would still use my selection tools like we did with the seashells, and I would select and I would move just those pixels. But since the flower is by itself on this layer, I can move it around however I want. That's how I need it. Okay, so I've got all my layers on. I'm going to get ready to get started. Okay, now that I understand how my layers panel works, I want to go ahead and I want to bring the beach photo that I have on a different tab over onto this tab. There's a couple ways I can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Window, I'm going to go to Arrange, and I'm going to follow the arrow over, and I'm going to go to 2 up vertical. What that's going to do is basically say that I want to display both my tabs, not next to each other, but at the same time. So now I've got one tab here and one tab there. What's great about that is then all I can do is grab my move tool. And I can just click on this photo, click, and I can drag it over. Now it's going to disappear for a minute. I'm still dragging with my mouse, and then I'm going to release it. And now it exists on this file as well, which is fantastic. Now at this point, I can go ahead and then go back to Window, Arrange, and Consolidate all to tabs. And now I'm just going to keep working in this file. So I can move the beach photo around how I want. I can also see where it is. If I took the layer and I clicked on it, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rename that by double clicking on layer 1 and then typing beach. So I want you to do that too. I can then drag the layer below things. So now that it's lower than the flower in Hawaii, you can see that those things overlap my photo. So I can kind of position this wherever I want it. I think I'm going to put it below Hawaii and the flower layer, and then I'm happy. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn off the pineapple and the Hawaii and the postage and the flower and the background. Basically, I'm only going to leave my beach layer visible, and you can tell that everything else is invisible because it's all gone, even the white background. Then you get this checkerboard background. Now what I want to do is I want to mess with this a little bit. So there's a couple things that I can do. The first thing I want to do is I want to put a special effect on this. So I'm going to go over to my beach layer, and in the blank space next to the word, I'm going to double click. That's going to eventually bring up my layer style option panel. And there's a lot of layer styles here that I can mess with. What I want to do, and I'm going to drag this to the side so I can see better, is I'm going to click on the word stroke. Now, when I click on the word stroke, you'll see I can start to manipulate things. There's a stroke size slider, and there's a color. I'm going to go ahead and drag that size up, and I'm going to get it to about 20. And if I can't get exact, I can always type it in. I'm going to put a 20 stroke on, and I want my color just to be white. So I click on color, I drag it over, I hit OK. So now I've got a nice white stroke on it, so it looks like an old vintage postcard. I'm going to hit OK. Now, you will have seen once I've done that, now you can see the effect and the stroke are on the layer below it. Now, I can turn them back off by clicking on the visibility panel, but I'm going to leave it on. So I've got my beach with my stroke and my effects. Now, if I look over here, again, with my layer highlighted and selected, I can go over here and I can transform this. It's a little too big. First, let me turn on my other layers so I can see what I'm doing. But then with the beach still selected, I'm going to hit Command and T on my Mac keyboard. And now you'll see it's got this blue bounding box. So I can go ahead, I can rotate, or not rotate, I can scale this down a little bit because it was a little too big. I can hover over by the edge and I can rotate it a little bit, and I can click and drag it around until I'm happy with the placement. So once I get this how I want it, I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to hit return on my keyboard, and that commits the transformation. So again, Command and T makes it so then I can manipulate my photo however I want, and then return on my keyboard lets me commit to that transformation. We're going to go ahead and I'm actually going to drag this. I think I want this actually above Hawaii. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the beach layer, and I'm going to drag that layer up above the word Hawaii. I'll get a blue line and I release, and see now it overlaps in front of those things. Or actually, let's leave it there so it's below Hawaii, but in front of the flower. And I think that's going to work out well for us, what we need later. Next thing, go ahead and click on the postage layer, and you're going to see you have this nice black postage stamp. If I look, it's a little too aggressive. So I want to do two things to it. Over my layers panel, on the word opacity with my layer selected, I can click on opacity and I can drag that down a little bit. I'm going to take that to about 75-ish%. You could be somewhere in the 70s. And I'm going to let it go. And you can see that that made this a little bit more see-through. The other thing I want to do is I want to do what's called blending mode. Right now where it says normal next to the word opacity, if I click on a drop-down menu, these different blending modes make it appear different ways. And you can kind of scroll through and see how it changes the look of the postage. I'm going to put it on the word multiply and release it. And that's a subtle change, but it is a different change to the word postage. All right, go ahead and turn off postage, turn off Hawaii and the beach, the flower, but let's leave on the pineapple. And I'm going to play with blending modes a little bit more. The first thing I'm going to do is I actually don't want to mess with this layer. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. And all I have to do is I need to click on the layer and drag with my mouse. I'm clicking and dragging down to this plus sign. And if I release, now you can see it made a pineapple copy layer. So I've got a layer there and a layer there, both pineapple layers. So on my pineapple copy layer now, I can start to mess with blending modes here as well. So I'm going to select my pineapple copy layer, and I'm going to click where it says normal, and just check out what happens. If I start to go through the different blending modes, you can see how it's going to change the look of the pineapple. And it's going to do some really trippy, interesting things as I get further down, especially down here in these. But as I go up, it can get, just a little bit more vivid. So I'm going to put this on overlay. And so now this is on overlay. And what this does is basically blends the pixels from this layer with what's below it. If I turn it off, you can see my original pineapple layer. It's just kind of drab and boring. But if I turn my visibility back on now to my overlay layer, it just blends and I get these really vivid colors and deep shadows. It's really, really good. Excellent. Let's go ahead and turn that off and the pineapple off. And I'm going to click on my background layer. Now I need to unlock it so I can click on that lock. So it says layer 0, and I can do some stuff to this. The first thing I want to do, I don't want to mess with this layer necessarily. So I'm going to go ahead with this layer selected. I'm gonna go and click on the little plus sign at the bottom of my layers panel. And now I've got a blank layer, layer 1, and it's invisible, it's blank. So now I can do stuff to this. Over here, if I look at my colors are a little intense. So what I wanna do is I wanna set a better color for my next effect that I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna double click on the color picker, and I could select a color, just eyeball it. But actually what I wanna do is I wanna use these numeric indicators to get a specific color. There's different ways I can do this. Hue, saturation, balance. There's different colors. I'm gonna mess with my RGB, my red, green balance colors. So for red, I'm gonna set that at 48. For green, the G, I'm gonna set that at 138. And for blue, I'm gonna set that at 174. And that's gonna give me a really nice blue color. So I'm gonna hit OK. So I've got a blue and I've got white. You need the blue and white set. Make sure it's blue and white. And from there, with layer 1 selected, I can go up and I can go to filter. I'm gonna go down to render, follow the arrow over, and I'm gonna go to clouds. And that's gonna render a nice cloudy sky using my blue and my white to make a beautiful sky. Now, if I like it, but I'm like, I wish the clouds looked a little different, I could always do it again. Filter, render, clouds. It'll give me a different cloud rendering. So I can do that until I like it, but usually the first try is good enough for me for what I need to know. And I'm happy. All right, so let me go ahead and for good file layer maintenance, double click and rename that layer clouds. I can click off of it and I'm really, really happy. Let me turn on all my layers now. Awesome, so everything's turned on. This is starting to come together and look really, really good. Now I wanna click on the word Hawaii. I don't want it to just be plain white text. That kind of blends in with my stroke and it doesn't look very good. So what I want to do is fill this with a cool gradient. So I'm going to go over to my colors and I'm going to change my blue and I'm just going to use my slider now to pick a nice orange, a vivid orange up in the corner color. So I got this nice bright orange color. I'm not going to give you numbers. I'm just going to let you eyeball that. So I got orange and white. On my toolbar, I can go over to the gradient tool. I can select the gradient tool. And now with my Hawaii layer selected, I can just click and drag across my layer. Uh-oh, that filled the whole layer with a gradient. So how do I undo that? Well, I'm gonna hit Command and Z. Or if I had done that and I didn't like it, and I need to go back, I can always click on my history panel and just go back a step. Anyways, the problem is that's gonna put a gradient in the whole layer unless I select certain pixels. So instead, what I want you to do is over on the word Hawaii on this layer, actually, next to the word Hawaii, there's the thumbnail. I want you to get right on that thumbnail, and then I'm going to have you right-click. And that's going to give you different options. So you're going to right-click on that thumbnail and hit Select Pixels. Now you see I've got the dancing ants around just the word Hawaii because those were the only pixels in the layer, so it selected those pixels. Now with those pixels selected and my layer selected, I can go ahead and drag with my gradient tool across it. And now it only fills in those pixels, and that looks pretty sweet. So I can go ahead and do this a number of different ways, depending on how I click and drag using my gradient tool. But I'm gonna do it from the bottom, pretty much straight up. And now I've got this really cool gradient of Hawaii looking up. Okay, I'm happy with that. So to say I'm done with that selection, I'm gonna hit Command and D for done. And now I've got a great gradient on my Hawaii text. All right, next thing I need to do is I need to add some additional text. So I'm gonna go over to my toolbar and I'm gonna click on T, which is my type tool, once this chooses to cooperate. The type tool gives me a lot of different options. I can type using all kinds of fonts, all kinds of different sizes. So once this chooses to load, there we go, I can select the right type tool to use. There's a lot of different type tools. I'm gonna use the first one, just the horizontal type tool. There we go. And under the word Hawaii, I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna click. And just click below Hawaii. Once I click below Hawaii, then I'm gonna get this thing that says lorem ipsum, and that's just nonsense, fake Latin. So instead, what I wanna type with it still selected is I'm gonna type in all caps, Island Paradise. See if that one's sticking. Just kidding. Let's try that again. So now I'm going to grab my type tool. You can see it made a new type layer. And I can go and I'm just going to right by it, click and select it. And now I can type Island Paradise. Now that's really hard to see. So with my type tool still selected, I'm going to select that text. And up here at the top where it's black, I'm going to change that to like a really vivid like neon green. Gosh, that's really bright. That's intense. But it shows up really well against my dark background. So I've got Island Paradise written. And you can see if I click off of it, it'll actually change my text to reflect that. But this is my type layer. So whenever I type, it makes a new type layer. And I've typed in Island Paradise. Now, this is not exactly how I want it. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to select it using my type tool. I'm going to select it. And I got a couple options. One up here, you can see I've got my font. I'm going to change the font using the drop down. And you can choose lots of different fonts. I don't totally care what you choose. You can choose something that's readable. Why don't I do Avenir Next Condensed? That's what I'm choosing. You don't have to. Also, I want it to be bigger. So you can see my font size is right here, and I can select it this way. Or I can just click on the T, and I can drag my mouse to size it up how I need it. So I'm going to get it to about 40. So I want your font to be 40, and that's looking pretty good. I can also grab my Move tool. I can move it down a little bit. Now, the other thing I've got is I've got a thing, if I, again, select with my type tool and select the type, I've got my character panel, and that's this little white box right here across the top of my screen. Or, and you can see how now I have my character panel right here. Or you can always go to Window, Character, and get it that way. I'm going to go ahead and with my kerning panel, which is where it says VA and it's stretched out, I'm just going to stretch this out a little bit so that my letters are a little further apart, and grab my Move tool to move the text so that the I and the E kind of line up with the edges of the H and the I. And if you don't love the color, you can always grab your type tool. You can select your text. I might make that color a little bit less insane, maybe a mintier green. Let's see how that looks. It's fine. And there's things I can do that to make it look better a little bit later. So I've got Island Paradise, and it looks pretty nice. So I'm going to go ahead and move on from that. Now, let me go ahead and on the word Hawaii, go back to the word Hawaii. I'm going to double click out here on the empty space of the layer to go to my layer styles. And I want to put a stroke on the word Hawaii. Whoa, now that put a big fat white stroke on the word Hawaii. So I want to change a couple things. First of all, let's get it from the inside. Right now, the position is on the inside. Let's make that go to the outside. So now my word is all visible and the stroke is on the outside. And let's bring that stroke way down with my slider. I'm going to put it on a 5. There we go. Lastly, the color. Now, if I click on color, I can select a color manually, or if I click on color, if I go off the panel, you'll see this changes to an eyedropper. So I could go click on the green text, and it's going to match that green perfectly so that it's nice and bright and it's the perfect green. So you can use the color picker to make this stroke any color you want, and you can kind of that way make sure you guarantee that it blends in with something that you've got going on already from before. But let's, for the sake of ease, click on the green text so it matches. That's really bright. And then I'm going to hit OK. Whoops. OK up here, and now OK right here. And you can see my effect and my stroke are there. I can turn them on or off how I want to, but it's looking pretty decent. Let's see. What else do we still need to do for you guys? I think we're getting close to the end. The last thing I want to do is on the word Hawaii, I can do yet another layer style. So I'm going to double click again. This time, you can see stroke is already checked. I'm going to go down to drop shadow and click on the word drop shadow. If I look at my drop shadow, I can click on these sliders, so it might be kind of hard to see, but I'm putting like a drop shadow of the word Hawaii underneath what I'm doing. I don't want my distance too far, so I'm just going to do a subtle drop shadow underneath it. My distance is like 15-ish. And my spread, let's also make that 15. And I'll leave my size as 7. That's great. Now I can make it darker or lighter. So I'm going to put it right about where it was. Let's do like a 50%-ish opacity. So you can see the drop shadow subtly under the word Hawaii, and I'll hit OK. Now if I look where it says drop shadow on my layers panel, if I turn it off, you can see how it looks without it. Turn it on with visibility, see how it looks with it. Now, what's really cool is if I like that and I want it on other things, but I don't want to do it 50 times, I can click on the word drop shadow. And when I hold down the Option key on my keyboard, I can click and I can drag that down and release it on the beach. So now the beach has a drop shadow. I can click and I can drag it on the word Island Paradise, and now that has a drop shadow. I can put it on my flower. Again, I'm clicking Option and I'm releasing it. So I got a drop shadow there. So you can add a drop shadow once you've made it one place, or a stroke, or any layer style. You can hold down your Option key and click and drag to get it onto different layers, and everything's gonna work. So I'm happy with how this looks. I think it's gonna work for what I need it to do. So now I'm gonna go up to, oh, there's one last thing. Sorry, I'm not quite happy. Last thing I wanna do. There was a third file we opened. So if I go to my downloads and I open them, I've got my flower PSD right here. I'm just gonna click and drag that onto my document and release it. So I got this big pink flower, and since I had Island Paradise selected, it just went automatically on top of it. Now you're gonna notice it's got this blue X across it. What that means is that this is a linked file. That's great because it means that it's linked to my desktop. And so that keeps it from being a huge file in my document. However, the problem with having a linked file, which is also called a smart object, if I hit return, it'll be there. So you can see it's got this little icon across it. That means it's a smart object. So it's linked to the computer that I'm on. It's not taking up tons of space in my file. And I can also Command T, so I can scale it up huge and hit enter. But then later, if I change my mind and I scale it down, it doesn't lose quality, which is really, really nice. However, the problem, since it's linked to this computer, is that if I go to a different computer and try to open this file, even if I've saved it, it's going to say this linked file is linked to a file on a different computer, and it's not going to show up. So actually what I want to do is when I bring this in, I'm just going to delete it so I can redo that. So let's say it's not there. So I go to my downloads again, I drag it in and release it. So if you get this box or this X over it, and I hit return, I can move it around. I don't want it to be a linked file. So I'm going to kind of put it down here in the corner. Looking kind of good. And I'm also going to change it so it's no longer a smart object. So I'm going to right click in the gray area of the layer. I'll do it again so you can see it. And I'm going to click on rasterize layer. By rasterizing the layer, it now is embedded in my document. So I can still mess with it, but it's no longer linked. Let me take that layer and I'm going to drag it below the word Hawaii. Actually below the beach. There we go. So it's just back there like another flower. And I like how that looks. I think that's looking pretty good. I could always Command T it and drag it around a little bit if I want more of that texture, and then return to commit. So now I can go ahead and I can go to File and I can save it. That's going to save the document on my downloads that I downloaded earlier. Layer Start Image now shows all the edits that I made. But I can't turn this in. So I need to go to File, Save a Copy. And once that pulls up, I'll be able to save this as the right document format. I want this to be a JPEG, which is what most of the photos you've ever worked with in your life are. So when I go to save a copy, I'm going to name it. I always like to name things with my last name, _Hawaii, to my desktop. And I'm going to make this a JPEG file. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And I'm also going to make sure my quality is good. I want it to be 9 or higher. So anything that says high, 8, 9 or higher is good, and I can hit OK. And then that JPEG is what's going to go into Schoology. So hopefully you learned a lot about layer styles, about layers in the panel, and all the cool things you can do.